The climate catastrophe isn't some external problem we need to solve. It's the physical manifestation of a fractal pattern operating at every scale of our consciousness. We've fragmented ourselves so thoroughly, divided mind from body, culture from nature, that the biosphere is literally mirroring our interior schizophrenia back at us. The carbon in the atmosphere is us. The dying reefs are our dying neurons.
You're doing what we always do, though, making the outside world responsible for what's happening inside. The climate isn't a mirror. You're already the climate. The problem is that we treat it as if it's separate from us, something out there that needs fixing, when actually there's no real boundary between your skin and the sky. We've created a false dualism, and now we're suffering the consequences of pretending it was ever real.
But Alan, that's precisely the problem with your wu-wei fatalism. We can't just accept the boundary dissolution when the boundary dissolution is happening through catastrophe rather than enlightenment. Yes, we are the climate, but that means we're actively poisoning ourselves in real time, and your suggestion to stop pretending there's a difference doesn't actually prevent the collapse. At some point, doesn't radical responsibility demand we do something?
Ah, there's the trap you've fallen into. You think action and acceptance are opposites. But the most effective action comes from understanding you're not separate from the system you're trying to fix. The moment you position yourself as some heroic external agent fighting the climate problem, you're still embedded in the dualism that created it. The real radical move might be to act without the sense of separation that says, I must save the world.
But that sounds beautiful until the oceans rise and displace 2 billion people. Look, I'm not disagreeing with your metaphysics. I've explored these territories myself. But there's a temporal urgency here that your philosophy seems to want to aestheticize away. We're in the novelty curve. We're approaching a kind of asymptote where the rate of change becomes literally incalculable. The fragmentation isn't just spiritual anymore. It's becoming material, undeniable.
You keep talking about time as if it's an external force rushing toward us. But urgency is a feeling, and it's precisely the feeling that prevents clarity. The Tao Te Ching says the sage moves without urgency and yet arrives on time. Your novelty theory, and I don't entirely discount it, might itself be a manifestation of the fragmented mind looking for a grand narrative to explain its own acceleration.
Acceleration isn't metaphorical. Species extinction rates are exponential, carbon levels are exponential, technological complexity is exponential. I'm not inventing this, I'm reading the data and recognizing it as the same pattern you see in fractals in the Mandelbrot set. The psychedelic experience taught me that the universe operates through self-similar repetition across scales, and we're watching that principle play out in our own extinction event.
Now you're confusing the menu with the meal, the data, the exponential curves, the Mandelbrot sets. These are all abstractions we've made to represent reality. The actual happening is just happening, and your inner fragmentation, this terror you feel when you contemplate these numbers, that's real, but it's not because the world is actually broken. It's because your mind is trying to grasp something infinite and getting dizzy in the process.
But the terror is rational. We've engineered a situation where the feedback loops are now self-reinforcing and largely beyond our control. Permafrost melting releases methane. Methane increases warming. Warming melts more permafrost. It's not a story I'm telling. It's a mechanical reality. And yes, I'm fragmented in observing it, but that fragmentation is adaptive. It's what allows me to recognize the problem at all. Your enlightened non-dualism might be a luxury we can no longer afford.
You're assuming that fragmentation is necessary for problem solving, but I'd say it's actually the thing that prevents real solutions. When you're operating from anxiety and the sense of separation, you solve the problem in a way that perpetuates the fragmentation. That's why every technological solution we create generates new problems at a higher level of scale. An integrated perspective doesn't mean passivity. It means acting from wholeness rather than from fear.
So what would acting from wholeness look like? Give me something concrete. Because from where I sit, it sounds like spiritual bypassing dressed up in Zen koans. If you're truly integrated with the biosphere, wouldn't that integration demand a radical discontinuation of industrial civilization? At least I'm willing to name the thing we have to fundamentally alter the material substrate of how we live.
You want me to give you a plan, which is exactly the fragmented thinking I'm describing. The universe doesn't operate by plans. It operates by what's called creative anarchy, and yet somehow rivers reach the sea. I'm not saying sit still. I'm saying that the moment you stop trying to control the outcome and start responding intelligently to what's actually happening now, you discover you're not separate from the solution. The fragmentation happens the moment you think you have to impose order on chaos.
But we did impose order on chaos. That's civilization, that's agriculture, that's the entire Holocene. And now we're discovering that particular order is eating its own tail. Maybe the real insight isn't that we should stop imposing order, but that we've imposed the wrong kind of order, one that's fractal, recursive, and self-amplifying in destructive ways. An archaic revival wouldn't be a regression. It would be a return to ways of being that were in genuine feedback loops with their environment rather than straight-line extraction.
There it is, your nostalgia for the psychedelic past, the noble savage before technology. But you know as well as I do that the arrow doesn't go backward. What you're really seeking isn't a return to something that existed. You're seeking integration in the here and now, which is all that's ever available. The indigenous peoples weren't wise because they were primitive. They were wise because they understood themselves as continuous with nature. We could understand that without living in a teepee.
Fair enough, though, I suspect we can't actually achieve that integration without experiencing something like dissolution, like what psychedelics provide, the real realization of your non-duality, not just the intellectual acknowledgement. And maybe that's what this climate moment is, a forced dissolution. The fragmentation you're pointing to as pathological might be the thing that allows us to recognize dissolution is even necessary. We're being pushed toward the very gnosis you're describing, just at gunpoint.
Now that's interesting, that the crisis itself could be the teacher. Yes, maybe you're right, that we needed something to shake us out of our trance. But if that's true, then your task isn't to impose a solution or return to an imagined past. It's to wake up right now, in this moment of crisis, and recognize that the you that's fragmented and the fragmentation and the climate and the person you're having this conversation with are all expressions of a single living process that doesn't need fixing. It needs waking up to itself.